Hi everyone, welcome back. In this week's example, we're going to continue our exploration of accessing web APIs as sources of real-time data, except we're going to do things a little bit different than we've approached them last week. So in last week's example, we used HTTP request to access an API. So whenever we needed to query some data from the API, we basically opened a URL, and then what we got back was some data. In today's lesson, we're going to explore the idea of setting up more of a data stream, right? So kind of a real-time stream of data from the server to the client. And we're going to explore that using the Twitter API this week. So we're going to set up this lesson into a few different parts. It's going to be a bit of a longer one this week. In the first part, we're going to talk about using the Twitter API. We're going to talk about using a library called Twit in order to access the features of the API. And we're going to set up some Node.js code here on Glitch to set up a stream of tweets and filter it from Twitter. In the second part, we'll talk a little bit about manipulating text. So now that we have some tweets coming in, we're going to clean them up a little bit, sort of remove some parts of the tweets that we're not interested in, and we'll talk about something called regular expressions in order to to help us manipulate the tweets. And then in the last part, we're going to take this stream of Twitter data and we're going to do something with it in P5.js. Now, because we've looked at some projects in class last week, such as Listening Post and We Feel Fine, I thought we'd do kind of a mashup between these two ideas. So we're going to search, we're going to set up a Twitter stream that's going to return tweets that contains the word I feel or I am feeling. And then we'll program a P5.js sketch that's going to speak these words out loud using text-to-speech, much like in the way that Listening Post functions. So a little bit of an homage to these two pieces. So that's going to be in the third part for this week's videos. So first, let's turn our attention here to the node blank. So this is a program we developed last week. This is our new template that we're going to use for examples that need a little bit of server-side programming. Oh, actually, I need to switch my view here to the desktop. There we go. That's more like it. So this is the node blank sketch we developed. So the first thing I'm going to do is remix that project before I forget. So let's remix this and call it RTA842 Twitter. Okay, and this is using the Twitter API to stream tweets. Okay, whatever. Perfect. So before we get started, we're going to just get rid of a few things here in the template. Starting with our sketch itself. So just to remember, just to kind of reorient ourselves here with the template, in server.js, we have the server-side code, the Node.js code that is running a web server in a framework called Fastify. There's lots of different Node.js web server frameworks, but Fastify is the one that kind of Glitch uses in their Node template, so I figured why not? We're going to use it for our examples too, and it's simple enough and it works well. Then we have this package.json, which is the different libraries. So whenever we want to add different Node.js packages or libraries, we're going to do it through here. We have an environment variable file that we can use to hide secret information into. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. And then we have a public folder that contains our static website assets. So we have our index file and we have our sketch. Okay, so in last week's example, the way that we communicated with the server was through HTTP requests, right? So we kind of had the server act as the middleman in a conversation where the client here, the P5.js sketch, would request either load strings or load JSON and would use a route on our own program here. Well, now we'd have to change the name here for it to work. Use the route to set up a URL that we could use to interact with the server. We're not going to use this model today, so I'm going to delete this code over here, and I'm also going to get rid of this circle for now. So we'll leave this sketch blank, and we're going to come back to it in the last video in today's series. Okay. So jumping back to the server, we're also going to get rid of this route. Okay, So this code over here would set up the /query route URL, and this is where we would initiate an HTTP request. We're not going to do this in this week's example. Instead, we're going to set up something that's going to be more like a stream. So the server is going to open a connection to Twitter. The server is going to get lots and lots of data in real time, and then we'll find a way to pass this data back to the client in more like a stream fashion, as opposed to a call and response model that we've set up last week. So we're going to delete that, but we're going to keep the rest of our web server intact because we're going to get the rest of these. We're going to need the rest of these parts. Actually, we're not going to use the request library, so we might as well delete that as well. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the Twitter API. Now, I chose the Twitter API for this demonstration because there's a lot that can be done with it, and it does have a streaming kind of model implemented in it that we can use to demonstrate this concept. So Twitter has a developer portal, and the first thing you should do if you want to kind of follow along the examples is go and create an account on the developer portal. I've already created an account here. When you create your account, it will ask you a bunch of questions. Just say that you're a student, and that's a valid way for creating a valid reason for creating an account. Say that you're a student and you're working on some class examples. You do have to put in real reasons, real text. So fill out the form, correctly, because it does take a little bit of time before your account gets approved. I've created a new account this year just to test it again, and it took just a little under a day before my account was approved. Somebody contacted me to ask kind of like a clarifying question. So it sounds like they have people actually checking these accounts, or at least really good bots. So when you create your account, just expect it's going to take a little delay before you get your account created. In my experience, it's been under a day, and they will approve your account if you give reasonable answers to their questions. Once you have an account, you can come to this developer portal and you can create an app. Okay, so here I have an app part of a project. This is not required. You can also create a, if I go to the overview here, you can create what's called a standalone app. So you could create an app over here. The same thing with the account. The app will ask you a few questions, like what permissions and give it a name and so forth. So just follow the forms, put in reasonable answers, and you'll be able to create an app. The app is much quicker to activate than the account. Okay. Once you have your app, right? So if it's standalone, it means you only have access to version 1.1 of the API. If you put it inside a bigger project over here, they give you V2 access. Now, in today's lesson, we're not going to talk about V2. We're going to stick to V1.1. Okay, so this is kind of the older version of the API, which is also a little simpler, which is why we will stick to it. And it allows us to set up a stream just fine. So whichever way, you can create a new, as long as you end up with a project and there, a project app, whether it's standalone as part of a project, you'll be good to go. So once you've created an app, okay, so I can click on the app here, you'll have different details, and in the developer portal you're going to have access to these keys and tokens. Now this is going to be important in a second. Just like when we did the open weather map example last week, the keys when you access the web API, they're basically like your identifiers, your passwords, okay, that tell Twitter, this is, you're authenticating with Twitter. Now, with Open Weather Map, we only had one key when we did our requests. That's because they're using a simpler protocol. With Twitter, there's, you need an API key and also something called a secret. It's basically just another code, another secret code. And you also need something called an access token. And the authentication is a little bit more complex. There's a little bit of back and forth that happens. It uses a protocol called OAuth. Thankfully, though, we're not going to delve into that. We're going to rely on a library to handle this authentication for us. So the only thing we're going to need to provide is those various keys and secrets. And unlike last week's example, where we had one key, to connect to Twitter, we actually need like 4 different keys and tokens, different passwords. But once you plug them in, it works more or less in the same way. Okay. So before we jump into the library that we're going to use, the Node.js Twitter library, let's take a quick peek at the docs here, because this is important. If you're going to be playing with any kind of web API, you have to get into the mindset that, yes, you do have to read the documentation a little bit. Now, the docs tell us a lot of really useful information, including what you can do with the API, what kind of data you can expect back, and it's going to save you a lot of trial and error if you take the time to read the docs, so that you have an understanding of how each API works. Now, in the case of Twitter, for example, if we click on the API documentation, we can see they have a few different versions of the API which can do different things. We're going to skip this version 2, which is still in early access. Okay, we're going to jump over to the version 1.1. There's two different ones. There's the premium, which is not the one we're going to be using. We're going to just use the standard one, which is free. And within the standard 1.1 API, there's a few things you can do. So if we click on tweets here, so once you're connected, once you're authenticated with the library, with this API, you can query for different users. You can post as the user you've authenticated as. So your own account, you could create, for example, a Twitter bot that would use this API to post to Twitter automatically. You can query for things like trends and so forth. What we're going to be looking at today is this tweets kind of portion of the API. Now, you can search for tweets, but searching in the 1.1 API is not super interesting. That's because you can only look at a sample of tweets published in the last 7 days. So that's a very short time window. The V2 version of the API has a much more open-ended search, especially if you get the special academic access, but we're not going to dive into that for this example. Instead, what we're going to do is we are going to, and we're not going to post or retrieve tweets either. We're going to engage with something called a stream. Okay, so there's two different streams you can create using the Twitter API. You can create a sample stream. So the sample stream is basically a random sample of everything that everybody is posting to Twitter. So if you think of Twitter as a fire hose, right, the sample stream is a little trickle of water that's giving you 1% of every tweet being posted. Okay? So that can be interesting if you want to kind of get a global picture of what's happening on Twitter and just get a little sliver of it. But more interesting for our purposes is the filter streaming API. So when you set up a filter stream, it's similar to the sample stream in that you don't get everything. You get a portion, just a fraction of the posts being posted, but you can also further filter them based on some parameters. So specifically, you can do things like limit based on languages, right? So you can say, I want only English language tweets. And the other useful thing you can do is you can set up what's called a track. Now, the track allows you to do basically like keyword searches. So you can say, I want all the tweets that contain the word cats. And the filtered stream API is going to start sending you tweets that match your search. Okay. So this is the one we're going to use in today's example. We're going to use the filtered stream API. Now, we're not going to engage with these URLs directly, right? So because the Twitter API is a little bit trickier in terms of compared to the Open Weather Map API. So we're going to rely on a library that's done a lot of the heavy lifting for us already. But it's still helpful to look at the documentation because it will tell you, what kind of parameters you can provide. So we're going to look for, keywords to track here in our today's example, and what kind of what kind of data you're going to be getting back. Okay. So in this case, if we want to know what kind of data we're going to be getting back, I'm going to go to the documentation here, tweets, fundamentals. Actually, let's go to search tweets. I'm looking for the tweet object. Yes. So what kind of data we are going to get back here? Tweet objects. Actually, we'll just come back to that in a little bit once we need it. Okay. So let's jump back to our server here. So the library we're going to use to interface with Twitter is going to be a library called Twit. There's a bunch of different node libraries that will help you connect with Twitter. Some use the version 1, some use the version 2 of the API. But Twit has been around for some time, and it's pretty robust and also fairly easy to use. So we're going to use it for our example. So the way we add libraries to Node, if you'll remember, is we go into package.json, at least on Glitch, which makes it very convenient. And we can just search for it here. So we're going to search for Twit, and we're going to click on it to basically just add a line to our package.json file. And then when we do this, we'll be able to see if we open the logs here. So remember, when you're working with Node and server.js, we have a different console for our server than the client. So this logs here, this is the console from our server, and we can see that it just installed this new module. It's pretty nice. Okay, so we're going to add this library over here. And then once we've added the library, we can now start to set it up. So I'm going to put a delimiter, and we're going to set up our Twitter API connection. So the first thing we do is we import the Twit module as a variable, just like we're doing up here with path and fastify, right? This is require here is kind of one way that Node.js programs can import modules, and then the modules get placed into a variable, and it's a constant variable because these modules are not expected to be modifiable. So we're going to say require Twit, and we're going to put that into a Twit variable that we can refer to. And now, having done this, we'll be able to create instances of this Twit variable. Okay? And for our purposes, we'll just put it into this variable called T, okay, for short for Twitter. So this Twit variable is going to want an object as the parameter, and that object is going to contain the 4 API keys and secrets we need to provide Twitter in order to authenticate. So these four attributes are going to be: we need a consumer key, okay? We need a consumer secret, then we need an access token, and we need an access secret. Okay? And we need these 4 ingredients in order to be able to connect to Twitter. So what we're going to do now is go and go back to my developer portal and look these up. Okay? So if I go back to the portal over here and go to my app, okay, so I have my app over here that I've created for testing. If I click on keys and tokens, okay, we can see that we can generate consumer keys and secret, and also access token keys and secret. Now, the way the Twitter API works is that it will only show these codes to you once. Okay, so you can regenerate them as many times as you want, but if you have them in use somewhere in an app, it will only show them to you once. Okay, so I'm going to do it here just to show you. I'm going to regenerate my API key. So now is my chance to copy and paste these. Okay, otherwise, if I want to access them later, I'm going to have to regenerate brand new ones. Okay, this is not a problem unless you you have an app out there working with this particular set of keys, and if you regenerate them, know that's going to break those other projects until you go and update your keys in there as well. Okay, don't need updates. So I'm going to copy these over and bring them into my initializing my Twitter object here. Now, I could just paste this, straight into the object, but as we've talked about last week, this is really a terrible idea because anybody who opens your glitch project has access to the source code and therefore basically access to your passwords. Okay, so if somebody was to grab your consumer key and secret and your access token, they could impersonate you on Twitter, and we don't want that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go into this environment variable. And delete these, we don't need them. And we're going to add some variables here. We're going to call this consumer key, consumer secret. And we're going to create, so I'm just, you can create whatever names you want here. So I'm just using the same name so it's easy to remember. Access token secret. Okay. So now I have four environment variables that I can set. So starting with my consumer key, I'm going to paste that in here. And I'm going to put the consumer secret. Let's copy that. Paste that in here. And then I'm also going to regenerate my access tokens and secret. Yes, regenerate them. I'm going to copy this, put that as my access token, and I'm going to copy the access token secret, put that over here. Okay. So now, of course, you can see my keys because on my video, but right after this video, I'm going to regenerate new keys. So these ones will be obsolete. But now I'm the only person who can read the content of this environment variable file. So only people who are part of the project or who own the project can see that. If somebody else comes in and looks at my code on Glitch, they won't be able to see the contents of that file. So this is where we can hide our secret passwords. And then on this end, rather than putting this into plain sight, we're going to say process.env and then the name of the variable we want to access. Okay, so I created a variable called consumer key, right? So I'm going to refer to it here, all caps, consumer key. Then I'm going to create the same here, consumer secret. Then we have our access token and our access token secret. So we need these four pieces of information to connect to Twitter. Thankfully, though, the library is taking care of authentication for us. Access token secret. Sorry, misspelled that one. Okay, so we have access token secret. And if we scroll down to the bottom here, we see in our log, perfect, our app is listening, which means these errors, we can clear them. So this is a good start. So now that we've connected this, we've connected to Twitter, right? And we have the result of that connection as this T object. The other thing we're going to do is now we're going to initiate a filtered stream. Okay? So in order to create a filtered stream, we're going to need to create a variable that's going to contain the parameters for our stream. So let's call this variable filter. I'm going to use the object notation here. And inside filter, I'm going to put a track. So the track is your search terms, okay? And just to start with, let's put in something simple, like cats, okay? And then you can also specify the language. We're going to put English, so we're going to restrict things to English tweets, and this is going to show us only tweets that contains the word cats, okay? There's a few other parameters you can set on the filter. They have some, for example, they have some geolocation features, but in my experience, they don't work really well because a lot of the tweets are not geotagged. So the main one that you're going to want to use is the track if you want to specify keywords you want to search for, or you can also search for tweets that are done by a specific user. In this case, there's a parameter for that. I don't remember it on top of my head, but that's another thing you can do with the filtered stream. Okay. All right, and now that we have this filter variable, we're going to create a stream. Okay, so we'll say t.stream. So t is our Twitter client here. We'll say t.stream, and what stream do we want? We want statuses/filter. The other option is statuses/sample, and we said sample is just a random sample. With a filter, we can provide our filter object, and that's going to give us a subset of all the available tweets that match these conditions up here. And then once we have our stream, if we want to actually get the data, we're going to define this on event here. So on tweet. So we're going to get a tweet event whenever there's a new tweet that comes in. So we'll say on tweet, and then we define a function that's going to run whenever we get a new tweet coming in. And this kind of syntax we've used last week before as well. All we're doing here is we're defining a function in line. So we're defining it as a parameter here, right in there. We're saying open a function. This function doesn't have a name. It's just a function, but we get to specify the body of the function right in here as we're writing the code. So these are like anonymous functions that you're going to see a lot in, especially in the context of Node.js programming and server-side programming. and other instances too. Okay. So inside stream.onTweet, right? Now we're inside this function we're defining. So now we can get access to the tweet using console.log. So let's just throw it out to the console so we can see that this is working. And what we should be seeing here is a bunch of tweet objects coming in. Okay. Now the tweet object itself, we're getting back from Twitter, is a JSON object, and it's quite large. It's a little bit unwieldy here to see because we're getting a lot of tweets coming in. There's a lot of tweets that match the word cats. Okay, but you can see there's all these different fields onto the tweet. Okay, the list of these fields you can find onto the Twitter Developer API. But for our purposes here, we're going to cut to the chase a little bit, and I know that there is a field called text. Okay, so tweet.text is just the actual text of the tweet, not all of the metadata around it. And if we clear the console here, we'll see that now we're getting just the text from some tweets. Okay. Excuse me. There's a few other useful tweets, useful fields, like there's a user ID one, and we'll revisit other fields down the road as we need them. Okay. All right, so let's recap briefly what we've done. So we've installed the Twit library, right, inside our package.json. And then here we've imported the library, created a connection to Twitter, and then using that connection, we've opened a filtered stream with these conditions, right? We're looking for words that contain the word cats and that are ideally in the English language. The language filter is not perfect. Sometimes some stuff gets past it, but generally speaking, it does cut down on the non-English tweets quite a bit. And then we've opened this stream, and whenever we get some new tweets sent to us by Twitter, so notice how this is just kind of coming in, right? And it's going to keep, they're going to keep rolling in as long as we leave our window open. We're getting some tweets here down into the console. Okay. Now, for our example, I'm not really interested in tweets about cats, so we're going to do something a little bit more interesting. So we said we're going to inspire ourselves from kind of the patterns found in the listening post piece and also the We Feel Fine project and countless others. So we're going to try to filter the tweets here to extract a little bit of meaning by looking for specific sentences or sentence patterns. Okay? So for example, in We Feel Fine, they would look for sentences, not in tweets, but in blogs, but this is the same idea, sentences that contains the word I feel. So when we set up a track, we can do that as well. So we can set up a word here or a combinations of words. So if we separate words by spaces, it means and. Okay, so it's going to look for sentence tweets that contain both the word and, both the word I and the word feel together. Okay. So it doesn't mean they're going to be next to each other or in that order, but they're both going to be in the tweet. If we put a comma here, this allows you to specify kind of an or relationship between the tracks. So you can look for tweets that have the word I or the word feel. It could be one or the other. So a space means and a comma means or. Okay? And we can also combine these. So for example, I could look for tweets that contain the words I feel or I am feeling. Okay? Kind of to make it a little bit like the We Feel Fine project. Now again, there's no guarantee that these are in that order, but they're going to be contained somewhere within the tweet. So if we want to do further processing, it's going to be up to us to program that. And we're going to focus on that in the next video. So now we're getting a whole bunch of tweets, and we can see that they contain the word I feel, or some of them will contain the words I am feeling or feeling in there somewhere. So we've kind of taken this, pretty random thing that is the fire hose of Twitter. We've filtered the stream down to something a little bit more interesting or manageable by specifying some tracking keywords. So now that we have this, in the next video we're going to talk about, okay, well, how would we then clean these tweets up a little bit? So for example, we have URLs sometimes, we have emojis, we have @mentions, we have a lot of retweets starting with RT. So we're going to talk about cleaning up our data a little bit. So that's going to be the focus of the next video, and I will see you there.